Good evening from Beijing. Welcome to the China-US Economist Dialogue, or Econ Talk, as the special edition of Global Business on CGTN. I'm Kate Kuei. We all understand that we are now in a critical historic moment. As Henry Kissinger mentioned in this year's China Development Forum, the world peace and prosperity largely depend on the cooperation of China and the United States, these two nations. Well, much has been achieved since Henry Kissinger came to China 50 years ago and reopened the bilateral relationship. However, during the past several years, especially recently, we observed a reverse trend as countries are moving apart as they should be moving together to find solutions to control the pandemic and battle against the economic downturn. The deterioration of the bilateral relationship impacted trade, followed by technology war, increasing military tension, and fracture in diplomatic ties, underlying the trend of China rising and the US declining. There must be something we can do to avoid falling into a trap that history has already told us not to. Today, we are honored to have Jeffrey Sachs, professor from Columbia University, joining us from New York, who is ranked by New York Times as one of the most important economists in the world. He is also a bestseller, while of course we also remember his famous shock therapy introduced by him in the 1980s. In studio together, we are honored to have Professor Yao Yang, who is the Dean from Peking University National School of Development, who is also a prolific writer that has published regularly to a global audience and also won numerous awards as a highly respected economist. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show today. I hope we can have a timely and also candid discussion. Well, first of all, professors, let me ask you this question, especially Professor Sachs, you were so optimistic on globalization before, and you were even saying that we are now passing through the global stage and already entered into a sustainable development age already. Are you still that optimistic?
Well, of course, I'm worried, and we have reason to be worried because there are so many tensions, most of them unnecessary. And of course, we are in a dangerous period of shocks to climate, new disease, and many other natural hazards which we could have foreseen, but we didn't prevent. So this is unfortunately an unstable period, but made a lot worse by the geopolitical tensions right now that mainly were caused by the United States and are amplified by the United States right now. And this worries me most. The fact of the matter is, if we cooperate, if China, the United States, the European Union, Japan, Korea, and other countries cooperate together, all of the problems that we face, whether it's the pandemic or climate change or economic instability, can be solved. We don't face immeasurable and insurmountable problems. We face the challenge of cooperation. That, unfortunately, is in short supply right now. I attribute that mainly to the bad judgments of my own country's government, the United States government, which I think is making very serious mistakes. But if we can find a way to global cooperation, then we can solve our problems.
Right, I think that's very helpful. Well, the collateral damage is really done. What is done is done. So, Professor Yao, what do you think, if realistically we are going to start cooperation, as what Professor Sachs just mentioned, what are the first reasonable or realistic areas that can be started?
Well, the Alaska meeting was quite helpful, I think. You know, if you look at the social media on both sides, they were quite occupied by the opening remarks, right? So dramatic, people like that. People don't pay attention to the real achievements of the talks, right? So in the talk, both sides said, both countries agreed to set up a working group on climate change.
Right.
I think that's a major progress. It shows the whole world that the two major countries can come together and cooperate on this vast problem that a human being is facing, right? So that's promising. So on this count, probably I'm a little bit more optimistic than Professor Sachs.
Right. So you are saying that climate can be the first step that we actually try to reach the same goal, so to speak. Apart from climate, is there any other areas?
Think about now we have lockdown on both countries,
right.
Particularly on international travel.
Right.
I think in the meeting also said in the next few months, judging by the development of pandemic, the two countries probably are going to reopen people-to-people exchanges,
right.
for example, to restart direct flights
right.
between the two countries. That's also very good. And the two countries have agreed to negotiate so-called reciprocal treatment
right.
to diplomats and reporters. That's also very good. That's going to build confidence and trust between the two countries.
So you're actually saying that during Alaska summit, we did actually achieve something. It's
Yeah.
not that nothing has been achieved, as pessimistic as what Professor Sachs was just mentioning. So climate change, Professor Sachs, do you think we can achieve climate goal that's set by our government in 2030 and 2060 only by ourselves without coordination and cooperation from the US side or the Western countries?
Let me first say I'm very happy with Professor Yao's optimism, and I want to join it. Of course, the two sides should cooperate. I was not happy with what I felt was the rudeness of the American delegation in opening the conference in such a rather hostile approach. And the lead up to the conference itself was rather hostile as well. But I certainly want to join optimism where we can find it. And climate change is the quintessential issue, really the key example of where cooperation is vital.
Right.
Because no country by itself can end the climate crisis. It is the result of all of the economic activities around the world. China and the United States, the two countries together, account for more than 40% of the total emissions. So we have a big job to do as
right.
two. But even our role is only part of the global role. So we need to go to this year's climate summit, COP26, which will be in Glasgow, Scotland in November, with the whole world agreed on a major cooperative approach to decarbonize the world's energy system. That is to move from coal, oil, and natural gas to wind, solar, hydro,
right.
and other zero energy sources. And China and the United States have a lot of key technologies to contribute to that. China has been the low-cost provider of renewable energy, and China can not only decarbonize its own country, as President Xi has said, and it was confirmed in the recent policy meetings, will happen before 2060, and I think should happen before 2050, by the way. Right. But China can play a very, very big role in helping the rest of the world to decarbonize as well. So this is not only a crucial area, but an area where cooperation is both necessary and absolutely achievable. It seems to be an area where the US and China have said that there will be cooperation, and that indeed is good news.
Do we actually have a mechanism of carbon price setting agreed with global consensus already, which is probably the key? Because when you invest, you need to get the benefit out of it. At least they have to be equal.
Well, the thing is that the commercially renewable energy is now viable.
Right.
For example, solar power, we used to believe solar power was so expensive, but
right.
today it's almost as inexpensive as firepower. Actually, it's going to be cheaper than firepower. Of course, we still need the new technology, particularly storage technology, right? So we can just smooth electricity transportation on the grid. Right? That's quite vital.
Right.
But we are going to be able to do that. But in terms of U.S.-China cooperation in this area, we should move on. China needs to lower coal consumption, that's for sure.
Right.
But even in 10 years' time, China probably still needs to consume a lot of coal. But the United States has this carbon capture technology.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So those two countries have potential to cooperate with each other.
But Jeffrey Sachs, do you think that they will actually cooperate? Because that relates to technology transfer. Will the U.S. side actually be willing to transfer such kind of technology to China and other developing countries who needs them?
Well, technology transfer is going to go in both directions because China is ahead in many areas, for example, in the low-cost production of many key technologies.
Right.
I think that one thing I would emphasize is that this is actually an area where we need plans, and China is good at planning. We need plans to decarbonize. By the 2030s, all of the new vehicles sold in the world, especially the automobiles for personal use, should all be electric or zero emission vehicles. That's a kind of plan, and we need standards for international trade and for the international battery supply chains and so forth. And that's an area where cooperation can go forward. So there's a lot that can be done in a very, very practical way. China should be sharing technology with the rest of the world. The United States should be sharing technology. One of the problems, of course, is that, well, to an extent, it's a US obsession, and to an extent, there's a substance to it, which is that many technologies are so-called dual use. They have both a civilian and a military application. Right. And this is really true in the digital age and with artificial intelligence. So the United States is taking the view, very much excessively in my opinion, that we need to separate technology systems because they have military potential and we have military competitiveness. I think this is a deep mistake because what we should be doing is also negotiating seriously away from cyber warfare, ways to ensure that we have the use of digital technologies for civilian purposes in a safe way, and that we don't militarize these technologies. So this is a new kind of issue. We know that digital technologies can be militarized, so we need agreements to stop that process, not just to accept that we're going to have an arms race in cyber warfare. We need actually to stop the arms races. They're expensive and they're dangerous,
right,
and they turn into real war, unfortunately, all too often. We need to have agreements to cooperate in the civilian use of these technologies and to prevent new arms races in these technologies.
Right. Actually, Professor Sachs, from what you just mentioned, there are two layers of the meanings as far as I understand. First of all is Trump's government, the wrong accusation or mistakenly confused the military use versus actual business use for the technology from China mostly. There, for instance, the Xiaomi sanction and also the Huawei sanction that you widely distributed on Twitter once are all these typical examples. The other thing is, you actually mentioned it, you actually gave a very optimal strategy to Trump government, how to, or to the existing US government, how to keep this dialogue going, how to actually make the technology exchanges and all these things, technology transfer viable and become practical. So in trade, international trade, how can we actually avoid a zero-sum game based on the same logic? And can you guys also give some optimal strategy for each side? I'll let Professor Yao talk first.
Well, I think China and the U.S. should start a new round of trade talk.
Right.
Both sides need that. From the U.S. side, the Trump tariffs are hurting American consumers.
Right.
And in the meantime, they have not helped shipping jobs back to the United States. And if you look at the American trade deficits, they don't come down. The U.S.-China trade deficits came down a little bit, but that was more than compensated by American trade deficits with other countries, right? So there's no use. Right? This is a lose-lose situation. And the Biden administration said many times Trump's tariff strategy was really bad. So that can be a starting point for the two countries to come together and negotiate. Then next, the two countries can talk about technological transfer, and also the trade of high-tech products. I can understand probably American governments wants to impose some restrictions on technological export to China, because it is so complicated. But the ban of high-tech products treated with Chinese companies, that's really bad, because that's hurting American companies as equally as hurting Chinese companies. American companies lose a huge market in China, and they're going to lag behind of Japanese companies, Korean companies, and even Chinese, Taiwanese companies, right? So that's also a lose-lose game, right? So I truly believe those two countries have a common ground to come down to the table and then negotiate again.
Right. So, Professor Sachs, any strategy of wise for the U.S. government on trade?
Well, I think it's important to note that Trump pursued a unilateralist approach. For example, declaring Xiaomi as a threat to U.S. national security, and a U.S. judge just threw that out, saying that this charge was without any evidence at all, that it was just a flimsy attack on the company, but that the U.S. government could show no evidence of it at all. Similarly, Trump imposed tariffs unilaterally on China, and then the World Trade Organization appellate body ruled that the U.S. tariffs were against international law. So I very much regret this kind of unilateralism. I think that the Biden administration needs to end this behavior, especially because it's been found to be in violation of the law. That is reason enough. But I do think that there are two really crucial channels. One is to reestablish the so-called high-level strategic dialogue. I'm a big believer in this. We are two very large, important countries, very complex issues. They need serious discussion. The thing that I hated many things about Trump, but one of the things I hated about Trump was his tweets, because one should not engage in foreign policy by tweet, especially two giant countries. So we need serious discussion on an ongoing basis. I regret that the Biden administration so far has said, we're not talking about renewing this so-called strategic dialogue. So far, that's a mistake, because we need serious dialogue. Perhaps we even need three-way dialogue with the European Union, the United States, and China for some of the issues. The second channel should be the World Trade Organization. There is a new head of the World Trade Organization. WTO needs to take on the complicated issues of what should trade policy be in the era of decarbonization. How should trade policy handle the technology issues and technology security issues? How should world trade handle industrial policy issues? These are complicated topics, but this is what you have WTO for, to handle technical, expert issues that require detailed analysis and then public deliberation. And we should move on both these fronts, the bilateral front and the multilateral front. But what we can't survive is just name calling, where the two sides are not meeting and where charges are being made mainly by the United States against China, which in my view are unfounded and also an inappropriate way to behave, because we need discussion and deliberation. finally, I would add we need a lot of track 2 dialogue as well, because when academics talk, when scientists talk, when engineers talk, they agree with each other on most things because we speak a common language, because we're looking at the same facts together, because we're not driven by politics and by trying to persuade funders or donors or so forth. We're trying to look at the facts together. So I believe that track 2 approaches are extremely important right now when the government approaches are too clogged by propaganda, frankly, that the United States is propounding, and that sometimes is just leading to, the kind of public bickering that we saw in Alaska, but which is not helpful.
Well, thank you very much. It's very insightful. But Professor Yao, just listening to what Professor Sachs just said, he's apparently still having very high hope towards Biden administration after Trump. Well, he should. I think the whole world should. But with a divided Democratic Party in U.S. right now, do you think what Professor Sachs just mentioned can be realistically achieved at all?
Well, I think that's hard, right? First of all, the Republicans really want to see that the Biden administration fail, right? But within the Democratic Party, there are a lot of debates. There are people who truly believe.
And Professor Sachs, actually, you concur with what Professor Yao just said, right?
We're so divided that we don't have a national policy. We exactly have this kind of partisanship, and there are a lot of crazy people in my country. So a lot of irresponsible people who don't know history, don't understand what's happening, but have very loud mouths.
Right, but why don't you finish first?
Yeah, but to be fair, I have to say, to be fair, probably the United States needs some room to do some adjustments, right? You see, with the last wave of globalization, China has benefit, United States has benefit, but the benefits have not been equally distributed in the society.
Right.
So United States needs policies and the room to adjust, right? So in this case, probably China should lend some help. Just like after 2008 financial crisis, China cooperated with the United States and helped the United States. So then the U.S. economy recovered quickly and the Chinese economy recovered quickly.
Right.
So that's a win-win approach, right? So in this time, I think China probably should adopt the same approach, right? To lend a hand to the United States, to allow room for the United States to handle some critical domestic issues.
Well, that's also a very reasonable suggestion. So we're thinking high-levelly from the political parties' perspective that if a unanimous view can be reached within the Democratic Party in the States, then things are going to be a lot easier.
Right.
When United States can actually breathe and adjust themselves from the previous Trump administration, then hopefully we can go for a smoother future. But is the business world in the United States and globally also thinking the same way? For instance, we just, I was just mentioning to you two before the show started, we see a lot of outrage from Chinese customers today against the wrong accusation by H&M and Nike on their basically they're saying that they're going to cut the procurement of cotton from Xinjiang because there's a forced labor issue, there are discrimination of minority issue. Those apparently are wrong accusations. And they even use the word slavery. For Christ's sake, China already ended the slavery society before Christ, 476, if I remember correctly. So, I don't know where this word is coming from. So, why all these normal business deeds are also being politicalized?
Well, every company, every person lives in a real world, right? They face a lot of pressures, right? Like you said, those statement was based on false information, right? Unverified information, right? But on the other side, I think probably Chinese consumers should stay calmer than we have seen today, right? To some extent, this was kind of a forced statement by like H&M.
So they made the mistake.
Yes. Right. So if we make a big story, then we fall into the trap of those people who really want to see that kind of a result, right? So if we can we can cool down. I think those people's intention just fail.
Right. What do you think, Professor Sachs, on this note? Let's make it short. Why do they politicize all these things?
I think that the main point is that these companies are responding to a lot of accusations that are being flung by governments. In this case, the Trump administration made really outlandish charges, but it didn't back them up with any evidence. And the fact of the matter is that on concerns of issues of human rights and so forth, where every country has to do well and do better because we are all bound by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we should abide by United Nations processes. We have a United Nations Human Rights Council. We shouldn't have governments just making charges and accusations without evidence. We should have a systematic approach. We have rapporteurs and investigations and so forth into what happens in the US or into what happens in any other country. And I think keeping a multilateral framework so that we're not descending into two countries fighting each other is really important, because the multilateral framework is a framework in which all countries participate, and then they make rules of the game that operate for the entire world in an unbiased way. So this is what I would emphasize, is UN processes on questions of fact, or if there are issues that are raised, that all countries should subscribe to, not simply accusations like the Trump administration made, and which unfortunately the Biden administration has continued.
Right. So, well, fair and equalness and go back to multilateralism, it seems to be a must. Professor Yao, in your papers, you often mention that China has already found its own system, the right system, on its right track, while comparing to what Professor Sachs criticizing on the Trump government's wrongdoing. Apparently that's a sharp contrast. So what is the system that, in your mind, that China has already found?
Well, this can be a long story, right? But in some short sentences, if you look at the last 40 years, China has been a huge success on every aspect, right? We have to think about why China has succeeded. I studied political economy, so I studied the Chinese government. To me, the real success factor lies in the Communist parties turning back to Chinese tradition. Right. For example, political meritocracy, right, to select capable government officials from below, right. And also pragmatism, right. Those are all Chinese tradition, right. So the Chinese system, the current Chinese system, is firmly built on Chinese tradition and Chinese teachings, particularly Confucian teaching. Right, to make advertisement, I'm going to publish a book on this called The Confucian State. Wow. And I use that model to explain the current Chinese political system.
Okay. Professor Sachs, do you think China's system is currently working well, in your view?
Well, first of all, I want to get Professor Yao's book. What a fascinating title and what an important contribution. So I'm excited to read it. I would think that China's success depends on also the mixed system that it has created, an effective government, an effective planning system, and an effective market economy, also with a lot of dynamism and innovation. And successful economies depend on this kind of mixed system. And finding the right balance at different stages of development and different challenges is paramount. But the idea that the free market or the fully planned economy could work these were the mistakes of the past. And what we need is the balance of different approaches. And I think China found a very effective balance. During the past 40 years, the results have been astoundingly positive in terms of rapid economic development.
Thank you. So thank you, Professor Sachs. Well, thank you all for your time with both professors. It is really a genuinely enlightening and timely discussion today. Well, as Adam Smith once said, the two most important things in his mind is one, Columbus discovered Americas, and the second one is Vasco da Gama circling of the Cape Cod and also made his way to Asia, linking with Europe with trade and expectations. So globalization will and shall never stop for a better world tomorrow. So that's all for today's special edition. I'm Kate Kuei. Until next time, I see you.